Welcome to the Localization Fireside Chat. I'm Robin Ayub, your host. Join me for captivating conversations with industry leaders exploring localization, translation, and global communication. Ignite your curiosity as we expand your horizons through these conversations. So let's dive in together into the Localization Fireside Chat. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Localization Fireside Chat. My name is Robin Ayub. I'm the founder of this young channel that is dedicated for the localization conversation. This is an independent conversation. It's an independent channel. It's not influenced by anybody, just my personal initiative who decided there is a room for conversation in this industry that's unbiased, unscripted, that we can sit down with individuals such my wonderful guest today that's joining me, Mark Schreiner, who works for MemoQ, and he's also the CEO of MemoQ RFP, which I can't wait to find out a bit more about that. Mark and I have known each other for many years, and we really talk business most of the time when we talk, but what we thought that today is we'll get to know who the person is, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the business that he's in and the opportunities that this is creating for the industry. So thank you, Mark, for joining me this afternoon, and it's morning for you where you are. Thanks for being part of this conversation. I really appreciate it. And let's get going. If you don't mind, in your own words, we say on this channel, everybody's got a story, and yours, similar to mine, is dated a little bit, goes back a few years. From the start, where did you start in localization, and how did it all happen to you to enter the business?
Well, first off, Robin, thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. I do a couple different podcasts, and I've only had a few opportunities to be the guest, and so it's kind of interesting to have the tables turned here. But I'm really looking forward to this. In terms of my start in localization, it started off in 2008. But let me just give you the background. I had spent maybe about 6-7 years working in leadership roles in Asia, country manager, Korea, regional sales manager based in Hong Kong, and so on and so forth. I'd moved back to the US and was working. I tried a couple different jobs. I started to work with a company called Adequest that was doing project management localization for Microsoft, and I was doing sales for them. And my friend, who was the CEO at the time, Hiram Machado, offered me the position. While I was researching the industry, I came across in Multilingual magazine this advertisement for a job, CEO Asia Pacific for an unnamed company, but they listed out all the requirements. They wanted entrepreneurial experience, Pan-Asian experience, a lot of different things. And I took that home and I showed my wife and I said, "Look at this. This is everything that I've done." And it maps exactly to, and she's like, "You're right. You got to do something." And so I was talking with Hiram about an opportunity with him, but I had this other job that I came across doing my research for the industry. And I reached out to the recruiter. I wrote a very, long email detailing it or stating the case of why I would be a good fit for this position. And the recruiter came back and she said, "You know what? You're right. You are perfect. Unfortunately, we already have a candidate that's going to the final round. And so it's probably not going to work." So I took the job with Hiram at Adequest. 2 months later, the recruiters contacted me. She said, "Are you still available and interested?" And for me, it was the dream job, right? CEO Asia Pacific. And it said everything that they were looking for to line. Went through the most rigorous, well, CLS is a Swiss company. They put you through the paces, a very rigorous interview process that included, multiple interviews, but also flying out to Zurich, spending a few days there, and then going to Princeton, New Jersey to have something called psychometric testing done. And I was like, "Oh my God, how, they're gonna find something here." But fortunately, I made it through, and I got offered the job. And that was my first, stop in the localization industry. I worked for CLS Communication for 4 years. We had offices in Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Beijing, key accounts in Japan. And I really loved it. And I worked with some, our former colleagues, including Florian, and we were able to grow our revenues in Asia by about 500% over those 4 years. So it was great, first step in this business.
Absolutely. And I remember when I was working at CLS, and we first met each other at one of the sales conferences. I think it was in Zurich, one of those global get-together, I guess, for CLS. And you were working at the time in Asia and China, I believe. And I was wondering, when because a lot of people are, we work in a global economy now, and everybody can work and live anywhere they want to, pretty much. Did you have to move your family to China, or how did you handle their personal affair? I know when somebody take on a position like this, it's exciting, it's amazing, as you mentioned earlier. But how did the rest? I know the rest of the family handled it.
Well, as I said, prior to that position, I'd already worked in Asia for 6 or 7 years.
So you're already there.
Well, we'd moved back to the US, but my family is relatively international. I mean, my wife's from South Korea. My first son, Marcus, was born in Hong Kong. My second son, Makai, was born in South Korea. Our youngest son was actually the only one that was born in the US. But, when he was 2 years old, we got this opportunity with CLS. And so we packed up the whole family and we moved to Singapore. Now, living in Singapore is much easier for a non-local than, for example, moving to China. Okay, that would be a much more dramatic step to kind of pack up the whole family and go to China, especially at that time. So it wasn't that big of a deal for us. In fact, Singapore, we call it expat light, or because it's, you can communicate in English, everything's set up. They have so many different people from around the world there. So it's a great place to live. And we had 4 years there, and it was a great experience for the family.
And Mark, for those, we mentioned a little earlier about your current role. Now that we got to know you a little bit on a personal level, let's talk a little bit about where you are right now. What do you do? And if you don't mind explaining a little bit about your role now. And I know you have an exciting new initiative on the go. I'd love to know a little bit more about MemoQ RFP that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so about 2.5, 3 years ago, I started working with MemoQ as the strategic sales director, which is basically to help MemoQ expand our footprint in some target markets, basically life sciences and financial services. Excuse me. I was also asked to kind of help out with some other strategic initiatives, for example, help to accelerate our growth in Asia. But I was brought in on another project that was to help kind of improve or optimize our RFP response process. RFPs are requests for proposals, and RFIs are requests for informations. They are a necessary evil in all industries. Companies, if you want to sell to large organizations, oftentimes you'll have to participate in this RFP process. But a lot of companies don't have a defined process or tool to kind of optimize. And so what happens is an RFP will come in and a business development manager say like, hey, I got this, now what do I do? And they'll go running around the organization trying to get all the different stakeholders to kind of fill out their respective parts of that questionnaire. So you'll have somebody that will talk about, the ESG part, the environmental, social, and governance, and you'll have somebody who'll talk about HR. Then you have somebody who'll have to answer the questions about finances, and then you'll have somebody ask questions about the product or the platform, and then security. And so you have all these different subject matter experts, and you need to corral all their expertise into responding to these RFPs. And it's kind of an annoyance for them, right? Because it's like, hey, you were just here last month and I had something similar. So what we did is we looked at, one, how can we optimize the process? But two, is there a way that we could leverage some of our existing technology to store previously submitted responses? So like, what we do in a translation memory, and then repurpose them and reuse them. And we optimized the process, and we're able to use some of the MemoQ technology. We actually hired another former colleague, Amy, who worked with Singapore, and she came in to run the whole thing.
She's Canadian now, by the way.
Yeah, she is. She's in one of the places that's even colder than where I'm at right now. So
I can't believe she's in Winnipeg. I don't know how she does it.
I know for somebody who's grew up in the Philippines and then spent 10, 15 years in Singapore, that's got to be a shock, right? So she did an amazing job. The results were amazing. And we started looking at, okay, this technology piece, is there a market to productize this? And we did a fair amount of market research. We brought in an external consultant. And the results were, hey, what? There are some solutions out there. They're not using our particular approach. And we think there's an opportunity. And so long story short, MemoQ invested in a spinoff, a completely separate entity, a US-based corporation that is now a startup called MemoQ RFP. And we're developing a SaaS platform to help companies, regardless of the industry, to help them respond to RFPs, RFIs, security questionnaires, et cetera, in a more efficient manner. And it's pretty darn exciting. I mean, we've got the dev team in Budapest. We're doing the foundational sales and marketing efforts. We've already signed up 15 beta customers. And so, yeah, pretty exciting times.
Oh, excellent. Now, one of the, if you don't mind me asking a few questions regarding the RFP platform,
Sure.
how did you solve or how did you tackle the problem of if a customer is not on MemoQ platform anyway, they're not like your necessary, or they are, I don't know, using your platform initially, the initial platform, and then they decided or they want to go to the MemoQ RFP. What is the deployment strategy for the new customer? Like, how do you take their current information, ingest it into the system without spending amount of days, hours, months
Yeah.
on taking that information and mapping it into an RFP system?
Yes. So just to make it clear, they're completely separate platforms. Okay.
You can
And
buy it independently, you're saying?
yes, you buy it independently, and even the technology itself, even though we're leveraging some of the conceptual technology that was used at MemoQ to help MemoQ solve this problem, we're developing our own. From the beginning, we're leveraging some of the lessons learned at MemoQ, but in terms of the technology, completely separate platform. And so we're targeting companies that, regardless if they're a MemoQ user or not. Okay, in terms of it's very analogous to if a company has never used a translation memory before, but they have a bunch of bilingual documents where you can align them to rapidly build up your TM, your translation memory. We have a process where we can take previously submitted RFPs and map the questions to the answers, put that in the database. And then we will have two ways to respond. One will be the database response, and then obviously we'll also have a generative AI response, because with RFPs, you probably know this, a lot of the response, it's one part science, one part art, where you want to put the kind of a marketing spin on some of your answers, right? And that's where AI can kind of come in and help kind of make things more readable and just kind of do that in a more efficient way.
And less dry, I would say, right?
Yeah, hopefully so.
So you've integrated an AI or Gen AI module inside the platform. So instead of being a platform collecting pieces of information related to answers for a particular RFP, you're taking that and then you're adding on top of it to answer a bit more salesy flavor to them.
Yeah. So, I'm giving you a simplification, but basically the users will go in and they will you first will pull up all answers that we can from the database, that the answers that you've submitted before. And then if there's no matches that meet your requirement or meet what you're looking for, then you can use the AI and give the AI some instructions. That's the adaptive part, right? The other part with the AI is you can obviously you can tell it to look at these specific resources and create an answer based upon what it's finding there. But you can also give it instructions, for example, of make it readable to a certain grade level, or make it, if you wanted to make it sound more marketing, use it, more to have more polish it. You have to edit this part out.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, that's my next question I was going to ask you, is that are you thinking here, when somebody uses the software, I guess there's always that hybrid model, right? So software and human integrated together in the same work environment, as we see in localization software or any other software in the world. Now, for this particular one, MemoQ RFP, if you look at it like from 100,000-foot level, what is the percentage of a human versus software efforts in this platform?
Well, you're absolutely right. There will be a hybrid approach, because the database will rarely, or the platform will rarely, be able to answer 100% of the questions in a 100% accurate or desired manner. So you always will want to have your subject matter experts in your organization take a look at the proposed answer and make edit to it. So it's very analogous, like I said, to the use of translation memory, where you get a match, it's a match or a fuzzy match. So the translator has the opportunity or the option to go in and refine it or polish it.
Yeah, and I love the idea of putting AI in it, because sometimes, and we all respond to RFP, and sometimes the RFP answers in some parts of the RFP are the same regardless of the industry of that RFP generated from, right? So, and specifically around specific things, not necessarily items that they're geared toward that industry, but some general building blocks, if you will, of a response. But it would help also to take even those general answers and turn them a little bit, tweak them a little bit using AI to the industry that you're responding to. Be it environmental industry, or be it a technology industry, etc. So because the reader now of the proposal can, I'm assuming, if you gear it toward them, then they can read it better, relatable. You want to move away, I'm assuming, in writing an RFP from the old dry fashion of writing an RFP where somebody's going to read it like it's okay, so boilerplate template, versus something that is customizable or customized to their industry, to their needs specifically.
100%. And I didn't come here today to put my RFP sales hat on, but I would just say one more thing, that another application of AI. Let me back up. One of the biggest challenges with RFPs that companies have responding to them is deciding, do we try or not? Because it's a big commitment of resources to kind of fill out some of these documents can be 60, 70, 100 pages long, right? Some of them are multilingual, right? So you might have to pay for the translation, etc. So do we want to invest the time here? Is there potentially enough return on investment for us to commit the resources? And how do you decide that? I mean, you've got a business development manager who's like, yeah, let's go for it. But then you've got product managers that are like, you know what, our product doesn't really do that. So that analysis step is critical, and it's important to the process. But how can you leverage AI to help you determine what's our potential win rate on this? And that alone is another application of AI that can help companies, again, optimize the response. Because you could say that, based upon what you've submitted before and based upon what the key selection criteria are, AI says you don't have a snowball's chance anywhere. So so you maybe you don't want to commit the resources to that. So that's another application of AI. There are others as well, but we'll be announcing more as we get to launching our MVP, which will be early next year.
Of course. And so moving on to another topic that you and I have done a couple of podcasts together on, which is rebranding. And you and I have talked about rebranding several times. Wondering if, the name has, that you've chose for, or somebody chose for the new company, is the name is going to stick forward, or is that a temporary name that you're going to rebrand down the road? Am I prematurely asking the question at this point?
No, I mean, I think it's a good question. What we looked at is definitely we wanted to leverage the MemoQ brand in the beginning, because it's a very strong brand in our industry. Outside of the localization industry, not so much. But it gives us a story to tell. And and again, without even having the MVP, we signed up 15 beta customers. A lot of that was based upon the strength of the MemoQ brand. Okay. Now, 12, 18 months, 24 months down the road, when we're talking about our next round of funding, are we going to keep that brand? There's a lot of discussion about that. My guess is that we would probably look at some type of modification, something that would make it more relevant across all industries, because our real target is small, medium-sized enterprises, globally, regardless of the industry. So we're definitely looking at a rebrand. But let's get some traction first. The whole thing with the SaaS-based platforms is when you're in the startup mode is get that MVP out there, get feedback from the market, get traction, which depending on which industry you're at and what time means different things. But typically it's 100 paying customers that are helping on a subscription basis. Once you have that, you've got proof in the pudding that you can go, and then you can go to the VCs and say, hey, we want that next round of funding. And that's the kind of the game that we're in right now.
I mean, I see a huge opportunity in this, because this goes beyond the localization industry and selling to LSPs, localization management software, or TMSs. This goes around, it's a horizontal software. Like, it can go around to any industry, really. It doesn't matter what the industry is. It's a huge opportunity.
My wife works for a medium-sized company that does playground equipment. Guess what? Probably about 30-40% of their sales is governmental, to cities, counties, school districts, and those opportunities are all won or lost via the RFP process. Guess what? If you have a platform that helps you optimize that company more competitive. They can figure out which ones they have a better chance of winning and focus on those, but they can also have, because they've optimized the response, they can go out and participate in more RFPs, potentially win more business. And yeah, so basically any industry that you can think of. It's funny doing the research for this. I looked at various RFP portals. You have things like, the SAP and the Arebas, but you also have every state in the US has a governmental state portal for RFPs. And there was one in the state of California that had this huge RFP for rat mitigation. So and if you think about prospective customers, I wasn't going to put, rat mitigation experts as a potential marketplace for the RFP platform, but apparently, so it's a very, very broad market. And I got to say, I love the localization industry for so many different reasons that we can get into. One of the things that is limiting, though, is if you are a language service provider, or in the case of MemoQ, a technology provider for this industry, you're kind of restricted a bit in terms of what you can do. I don't know. Do you ever feel that way?
I feel, on this channel, I always talk about, expanding our services and expanding the horizon, and look at the localization industry as part of the knowledge-based industry, right? We're not just localization industry. And what you just talked about right now, this service or product that you're offering, this is the example of ideas that they're grown from a localization industry, but they're offered outside of our micro industry, if you will. And on this, I'm sorry to say micro industry, because it is in comparison to other industries, pharmaceutical, automotive, etc.
You go to Local or Gala, the biggest industry events, and you might have 600 or 700 people there. When I was working for a Microsoft cybersecurity compliance partner, I went to a Microsoft event in Las Vegas, and there were 40,000 people there, 40,000. And that's a Microsoft event for all their partners, right? So that's not even an industry event like CeBIT or something, this is, so, you look at these consumer electronics shows, for example, or the pharmaceutical industry, and you would have hundreds of thousands of people. Now, I'm not knocking the local industry. I'm just saying, I'm just agreeing with you that it's a micro industry. The numbers are significant in terms of total revenues, but in terms of serious industry players, it's a couple handfuls.
Yeah, look, the entire industry, everybody knows that. I'm not, telling any secrets here. If you take the entire industry, put it into a spreadsheet and sort it from the top down by the revenues, you've got, 80% of the revenue generated by this industry at the top 20 companies, and the rest of it is just small to medium enterprise at the bottom. And there's 19,000 companies of it. When I went to, funny you mentioned the size of the conferences. I personally, in the localization industry, I hardly, and I do, but not always, attend industry events. And sometimes I do, it depends on my schedule, but most of the time, my
Robin, we've been missing you.
I'd love to see you guys. But just an example, like you've mentioned about the Microsoft, I attended the HIMSS 2007 or 2006, I can't remember when, long time ago now. It was in New Orleans. There was 65,000 people attending, and that's a healthcare conference, right? And so our industry has a lot of potential, because we've got a lot of brain power, a lot of knowledgeable individuals in the industry, a lot of professionals in our industry, to grow something in the industry and take it beyond the industry, similar to what you guys are doing with the horizontal sort of a service or offering that you're offering outside of for the industry and outside the industry. You're not in it anymore, stuck within the boundaries of what's going on in our industry. You have the freedom to do anywhere. Now, let's shift a little bit of focus on, you and I have been in a sales game for many, many years. Let's talk sales.
All right.
So what was your worst sales hire and your best sales hire, if I can ask you that? And I don't want to put you on the spot, and if you can answer that.
That's funny, because I always say that the most important thing you can do is hire the right people. And I think Jim Collins, from the Good to Great book, has this, he had the thing about get the right people on the bus. And the best successes that I've had have always been because we've had a great team, or we've been able to build a great team. The example of CLS in Asia was exactly because we were able to build a great team. One, I had a great boss, Doris. She gave me a huge amount of autonomy, and then she would come out and support 2 or 3 times a year, 10-day visits, and we would do this forced march through Asia, 5 customer meetings a day, just boom, 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 nonstop for 2 weeks. So I had that, but then the team that we built with Florian, with Anita doing finance, with Dylan doing sales in China, and a couple others, that was just like, it became so fun because we were good at what we were doing, and we knew what the customers, or we understood what they were looking for, and we could deliver it, and that feels so good. So to your point, hiring the right people is important. In sales, oh my God, I've had so many good, bad, and ugly experiences in terms of hiring, and I'm not sure if I can pick the absolute worst one. My philosophy, though, is to, what's the word, to cut your losses as soon as possible. If you find that somebody's not going to work out, and you can put them on a plan, and if they really make a sincere effort to kind of turn things around, it is possible. But a lot of times, because we're dealing with adults here, they've learned their work habits, their ethics, their communication styles throughout their whole life, and you're not going to be able to get them to turn on a dime. A lot of people especially salespeople, interview really, really well. But because they are salespeople, right? But then, I can typically tell within the first week, 2 weeks, but let's just say at maximum, it's a couple months, because you can look at activity levels. And that's what I look at, activity levels and the quality and the honesty in terms of the feedback. And you can usually tell. So I can't give you a specific one, but I've had some nightmares. And that's how you learn. That's how you learn. How about yourself? You tell me a story.
Well, this is crazy, because I mean, we're sharing here, right? So it's not me like asking question. I'm just having a conversation with you. On my side, I mean, I've had the good, bad, and ugly, as you did, and we call them, similar to what you said, get the right people on the bus. The worst here we can do in sales is, we call them round pegs, square holes kind of thing. So it doesn't fit. And if it doesn't fit, it means it doesn't fit. And absolutely, like you, I measure activities. Absolutely, you got to keep an eye on activities, and you got to see deliverables. And there is a notion where micromanaging versus non-micromanaging, and just managed by, rely on the professionalism of the individual to do what they're supposed to do, and you keep an eye on the reports, on the statistics, on what the deliverables are. But in some cases, you got to roll up your sleeve and you got to get into the weeds. And I hate that. I'm admitting this online. I'm not a kind of a detail kind of guy, but I do it, but it's not my comfort zone. And I should be a lot more into the weeds from where I am right now. So I feel like in sales in general, you have to get the right professional people to do the right work. And you're right, absolutely. In a few weeks, you'll tell if this is going to work or not. I mean, we used to use sort of like the conversation that you just had earlier, when CLS was having a conversation with you, they sent you to, what is it, New Jersey, to have that
psychometric testing done.
Psychometric test.
SHL, they subcontracted with a PhD at Princeton, New Jersey. No pressure.
No pressure. So
check it out, man. I spent a full day with this guy one-on-one, and I'm like,
I would be interested in reading that results. No, not just to tell anybody,
right,
but just like to see that. But there was a company I used to deal with, does something similar, less intrusive than one day. And it would tell me exactly what that individual is in terms of the high level characteristics of their personalities, right? So it would tell me if they're detail oriented. It would tell me that they're personable, they're outgoing. You don't want to, obviously, if you don't want to hire, you don't want to hire an introvert for an extrovert based job. You want to make sure that you have outgoing people, that they can reach out to people. And so these high level characteristics, you got to make sure you nail those down before you get into the weed of, do they have the right CV? Do they have the right experience? Can I do the job, and get into that detail, right? So, but then after you hire them, the proof is in the pudding, and you've got 90 days to deliver. And I don't know how that, some people do it, some people make it, some people don't.
So a couple of things. I think that part of the onus is on us as the hiring managers or the team to make sure that they have a good onboarding experience, and that sets the tone. They have to know the product, and and so they've got to do part of the work, but you've got to do part of the work. They got to know the team. They got to know who do they reach out to get the appropriate level of support. So that's really important. So you can't just hire somebody and say, hey, go make $1 million. So I do believe that onboarding is important for that knowledge part, but also to demonstrate to the new hires that, hey, we're taking this pretty seriously. We expect you to as well. So we're investing in you. And, I had some great you asked about the worst case, worst scenarios or worst examples. I kind of blocked them out of my memory, but I've had some great hires, like Dylan Young in China. He built that organization from 3 people to, I think when I left, it was over 40 people in China. And that was just based upon because he was selling so much. And then he hired a couple of other people that were selling underneath him. And so incredibly, and I remember having a conversation with him, my first time we met, and I was like, I'm a little concerned, and he's like, Mark, trust me, here's the plan. And he had a plan and he worked the plan and it worked. Other ones, Amy that we talked about, she didn't have a sales background. She had worked in in the healthcare. But she interviewed very well. She seemed very sincere, and she had that kind of like roll up your sleeves and I'm going to go for it mentality. And she did an amazing job. And so that was a good experience. Florian didn't have any sales experience. He managed a linguist team of like, I think it was like 4 to 6 Swiss linguists in Singapore. And then we moved him to take over country manager Hong Kong. And as part of that, I said, if you're going to take over that role, you've got to be able to sell. And so I still remember this. He probably remembers this, where we got into the thing about cold calling and we took out the American Chamber of Commerce directory. And I said, call one. We practice like what you'd say. And he goes, I don't know. I said, so I'll call one. I said, hi, this is Mark from CLS Communication. I'm a fellow member of the AmCham Singapore. And our CEO is coming to town next week and I'd like to introduce you. Something like that, right? That's all you do. And if all they can say is yes or no, right? And so he started doing it. We started cold calling and he became like incredibly productive sales person, but also he led that Hong Kong office and developed some really strong people as well. So those are really rewarding experiences. And you got me on a rant here. One of the things I like about sales is you can quantify the results. You can say, look at what we brought to the table that we didn't have here before. There's no ambiguity. Somebody will say, oh, well, he had the easy territory, or he has that, whatever, man. At the end of the day, if you took something from 0 and took it to 1 million, or you took something from 1 million and took it to 2, or whatever the delta is there, you've demonstrated your success. There are a lot of business roles, we can get into like the nuances of marketing positions, et cetera, where the results aren't as easy to quantify. And people can hide behind that kind of well, yeah, things seem to be going well. With sales, it's pretty much black and white.
Absolutely black and white. And you hit the nail on the head on a couple of points I wanted to mention and I want to explore a little bit further, is that leadership enables success, and leading by example is a great idea to get people onboarded, and even for existing teams. Even till today, in my role, I still generate leads. That's what I do, and it's many things that I do, and that's part of it. It is not necessarily just to make sure that my team is knowing that, look, you're not alone. I'm doing it with you, and if you have any obstacles, you're not alone as well. So you call me, and I'm in any conversation, any deals, anywhere you want me to parachute, I'm in to support you close a deal or find somebody or talk to somebody who, in whichever capacity you want me to be in. One of the things that I think sometimes, beside hiring the wrong person, sometimes leaders create bad salespeople. Sometimes, and sometimes it does happen. Just maybe the management style or the way, they come in all gung-ho, they want to do a great job, and somehow the air was taken out of the tires. I don't know. But in some cases, leadership has a tremendous effect on the productivity of a salesperson. Can you comment on that?
Sure. Well, let me go to your first point though first. And that in terms of like creating leads or finding leads for your sales team, creating opportunities. That's what I think one thing that Doris was super good at. She was able to leverage her network in the Swiss banking community in Asia to open up a lot of doors. And I remember meeting with like the consular general for Switzerland in Hong Kong, and he would say, oh, well, you need to talk to this person or that person at Credit Suisse, and doors just open. And I think that a good sales or good business leader does that for their team, or they can do that. And I and the rest of the team were so appreciative to have somebody do that. And then as I, developed in my role, that becomes my objective right now. I mean, right where I'm at, both with RFP and at MemoQ, I look at myself as a kind of a door opener and, try to create opportunities and then pass it on and then just shut up and let somebody else take the credit for it. In terms of, what the second part of your question was?
Yeah, the second part is around, when we hire people, we in either, they're be coming into the office or to the job full of energy, full of positivity. They're taking on a new job and they're looking forward to it. Somewhere, somehow, for the first 6 months, that gets deflated, either by not onboarding them correctly, something happened that energy drops, and all of a sudden, maybe we did not put the right tools in place, or maybe there are some misconceptions somehow. I was just
Well,
asking if you can comment on that.
yeah, I mean, I think that you were commenting like, from the leadership side, what sometimes happens to kind of cause that effect. And what I've found, again, we're dealing with human beings. The most complicated thing in the known universe is
That's right.
your ears up here, right? So and we all have these different experiences. I found that it's important to create a team environment, a welcoming environment. And part of that is probably because I spent a big part of my career in Asia. Most of, Asian cultures are more kind of team-based, consensus-based versus the rugged American individual kind of thing. But if you create a sales organization where it's dog eat dog, and then you ring the bell every time this guy gets a win, and then I've heard of organizations where the underperformers, the boss would take the list of the people who were below quota and put it on the bathroom wall, right? Stuff like that. If you want to drive or demotivate people, that's probably a pretty good way of doing it, right? And so I've always looked at it as it's better to create incentives that reward a team effort, especially when you're selling complex things like software tools, because I don't care how great a salesperson you are, you're going to need a solution engineer or a solution architect, somebody from business services to help you close that deal. It's a team effort. And so let's reward that team effort and let's recognize the team versus the individual. Now, of course, you get a big deal, Robin. I'm going to have you tell that story to the team on the Monday morning sales meeting and tell you how explain to the team, how did you find this prospect? What was the steps? Everything like that. But in doing that, I know you're going to recognize the team. So for me to answer your question, and it's a complex question, but the simple answer would be try to build a warm, supportive team environment versus this all boiler room, Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross, if you don't sell, you're out on the street kind of thing. Because I mean, those days are gone for most industries, as far as I'm concerned.
ABC is gone, right? Always be
Yeah, yeah,
closing.
yeah. Always be closing. Yeah, I say ABL, always be learning.
That's
And
right.
because every time you go into a sales meeting, I make mistakes, you make mistakes. The worst thing you can do is beat yourself up on it. Walk out of the meeting and say, okay, what went well? What didn't go well? The stuff that didn't go well, some people will just dwell on it for days and go like, oh, doesn't help you. Write it down and say, what would I do next time in that situation? And then memorize that. And guess what? You just got smarter. That's the,
That's right.
you
That's
just
right.
paid for your education with a little bit of pain.
Absolutely. And you bring a very good point. First, you had to remind me about Glengarry Glen Ross, and I'm just can't stop laughing on the inside. But coffee's for closers. I just
Get
like.
away from the coffee. Oh man.
And oh man, you bring a very good point in terms of working together to close a deal, specifically in a non-product sale. This is a service sale that has many angles to it and many expertise go into putting a solution together. This is not an environment where we have a bunch of widgets sitting on a shelf somewhere waiting for the purchase order to arrive, and then all of a sudden we start shipping it. This is more each one of those, and that's why you started the MemoQ RFP, is because each one of them is different. Each requirement is different. If they were the same, you wouldn't need a software for this, because in this case, it's a team sport. It is where everybody needs to pull together in order for us to win. I have a bunch of people that come in we talk on this channel, and many people tell me, Robin, we need to, how do we grow a company? And my objective is to grow the company like 50 to 60% or whatever the number they pick. And my first question, immediate question, is your team on board with this strategy?
Good question.
Is your team on board? Is it just you wants to grow this, or the entire team wants to grow the company too? Because if you are the only one thinking and hoping to grow the company by that amount or any amount, and your team, your production team, your engineers, whoever they are, they're not on board with this strategy, you are either A, have to change the team, or B, have to convince them to come on board with your idea.
Well, okay, so and I'm going to ask you how you would do that because if you look at the translation industry, it's actually a classic example where a BDM could go out, win a huge deal, and they're like, "Yeah, I got it," and you have your operational team going like, "How are we going to deliver on this?" Right? And so you do need both sides on board. You need the whole team on board. In that case, and let's put yourself in the role of the business leader, and your team isn't they aren't really on board. They're like, hey, you know what? We have this comfortable business. It just keeps, repeating. And so what's the conversation you would have with them to help them get on board or understand the importance of getting on board and
So
growing?
yeah, like over the years, and you are describing a typical example that happens every day in localization. That's not a one-off, unfortunately.
Yeah.
What we just described, what we're talking about right now, it's
Mm-hmm.
a typical problem in the localization industry. Now, there are some companies are more mature than others, and there are some companies that they can do better than others when it comes to those. And even with that, there's a separate discussion to be had, because in the larger organizations, in a more dynamic organization, they have set certain processes to fit certain deals, and beyond that, the customer doesn't fit, and then you have to go to the next vendor to help you out. So the conversation is around, from my advice and what I've done and what I've practiced in my current and past life within the same environment. Back in the days of Lexitech International till today, when the company was $2.5 million, and you take the company to like almost 28, $29 million by the time it was sold to CLS, there was a lot of transformation happen. And trust me, the internal team was not happy taking a company from $2 million to 28, $29 million over 5 years. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, this is completely unreasonable. So the conversation was continuous conversation with the existing team and changing few key components in the teams. Those are not coming on board with the idea that we need to grow, we need to roll up our sleeves, we need to think creatively how to build solutions for customers. Those individuals stay online if they take the conversation to heart and they practice it. And there are certain individuals, they say, you know what? They tell you, they play the lip service sometimes. They tell you, yeah, I'm on board. But when it comes time to delivery, they don't deliver. So those individuals, unfortunately, they have to get off the bus.
Yep.
And so communicating and selling the idea internally, and there is a saying in the localization industry, I hope I'm not the only one selling it. If the salesperson's time is 100%, there's about a higher percentage, and varies by company. I've heard it as high as 80% selling internally. So if you were to invest that 80% that we're trying to sell internally to sell externally to customers, what would that positive result look like? And I'm sure it would be positive.
Yeah. I really think it's part of the business owner and the leader to make it very clear why growth is important. And there's several different arguments for it. One is pure survival. Okay. If you're not growing, you're shrinking, right?
100%.
But also in terms of because everybody brings it back to themselves. What's in it for me? And
True.
I would have the conversations with my team and say, where do you want to be in 3 or 4 years? Okay. Do you want to be in the same exact role, or do you want to take on additional responsibility, or do you want to move into a lateral position? How do you want to develop yourself? And the people who you have on your team, hopefully they want to develop themselves, and hopefully they want to take on additional responsibility. And if they do, then you make it very clear to them. The way for us to provide more opportunities for growth for all of our people, including you, is to grow this business. And, it's not going to be easy, but I'm going to be counting on you to come up with part of the solution, which is another thing. Okay. So we're on this topic. I found it's super important. Again, I spent a big chunk of my career in Asia. A lot of times people are deferential to the boss, tell us what to do. That doesn't work. It works when you have 2 people. But when you got a team more than 2 people, it just doesn't work, man. So you need people to come to you with their ideas, and you have to kind of incentivize them and enable them, empower them is the right word, to say, hey, Mark, I think we should try this, or maybe we should try this, or what about this? And if you have created an environment where people are sharing ideas like that, that solves a big chunk of the problem of how do we handle the growth.
That's right. And a lot of time companies so by definition, the internal teams of localization business are a little bit objectionist to change.
Oh, yeah.
So when you introduce a new customer, or you introduce a new complex solution, or whatever it is, even though it's viewed by the owners as revenue growth, but to the internal teams is a change. I'm comfortable, as you mentioned earlier, I'm comfortable in my own situation. Why should I change? And I'm taking it down to a singular, level, like a project manager who's handling, let's say, 100 requests per day. Okay, so they're handling 100 requests per day. Now, you put a new customer in, and now they have to 125 custom requests per day. It's a challenge. Now, as part of the growth strategy is the expansion, and then making the individuals who are responsible for production in various areas in the company, the formula has to apply to all of them. In part, what's in it for me, you have to show what's in it for them. Like,
Sure.
where we fail as an industry is we don't show them what's in it for them. No, you're getting paid your fixed salary. I'm going to pile on more customers on you, more demand, but I'm not going to increase your salary. This is, I don't know how long that's going to work. It won't work, because part of the expansion is everybody needs to have a skin in the game and have to get something in it for themselves.
I like having the conversation of, what part of your job do you like and what part do you hate? What's the most tedious thing that you do? And, let's figure out a way that we can alleviate that or remove that. And growth could be part of that solution.
Especially now with the advancement of technology, Mark.
Exactly. That's the whole thing, invest in technology. And I've had that conversation with maybe 3 different organizations where I've been in, where project managers is like, this part of the job is killing me. And I was like, tell you what, we'll invest in the tools that will take that away from you, take it off your plate, and you're going to look like a rock star in front of your customers because you're going to be so much more efficient. But we got to grow. We got to grow, man.
So I know I'm cognizant of the time. I don't want to take too much.
Oh, no, I got plenty of time, man. I love to talk. I'm highly caffeinated and I got plenty of time. So
I still have one point I want to ask is sales models or sales process that you prefer in the business that you've done over the years. And I'll start with myself by telling you, I'm a big proponent of the Miller-Hyman process in localization, just because the complex and the strategic based selling and variety of decision makers being involved, etc. I feel like the Miller-Hyman one applies a little bit more for our types of sale. Depends on what product or services you're trying to sell, but in general, for you, do you have anything to comment on which model you use and what do you prefer?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that in 2 parts. One is I have a philosophy, and then I have a process. And my philosophy is that we should be not selling, but solving problems. And that sounds cliche, but I do think that it starts at the bottom where it's the foundational piece, I should say, where when I engage with a customer or prospect, I want to find out as much as possible about their business and what challenges they're facing and try to help them find a solution. Okay. I'm not here to sell you something. I'm here to try to help you. And I mean that. I mean, that's anybody that's worked with, I have customers that I've been doing business with off and on for 20 plus years. And they come back to me because they know that when they've got a challenge, they can talk to me and I can try to, and I'll be honest with them. I'll be like, I don't have an answer for you now, but let me go and talk with the team. And it might even be a couple months, but do I have permission to come back when we find something? And they always say yes, right? So I think that's important. Honest, open dialogue in solving problems. That's the underlying kind of philosophy. The process that I use is I would say I've cobbled together several different ones. And I don't know if you know this, but I actually wrote a couple books on sales, and
yes, you did.
In that book, I outlined a couple processes. One that talks about the external activities like cold calling and setting the agenda of a meeting and, writing proposals and closing deals, et cetera. But then there's also the internal game, because a lot of salespeople, they get beat up. They're like, oh, what if they say no? And oh, I've only got one meeting this week. And so I got this anxiety related to that meeting. And so I talk about that, but I'm going to answer this, a little bit more complicated. I think that you have to figure out what works best for you. It's kind of like Bruce Lee would say, whatever martial art, there is no one martial art. It's what works for you. If you're a guy that likes to get in and grapple, I'm not going to tell you to be a boxer. If you're a guy that likes to box, I'm not going to tell you to be a grappler, right? You got to figure out what works for you. But what I insist with everybody that I'm working with is you have to figure out what works for you and you have to use it. And you have to explain it to me, because I think that at every single step of the sales process, you need to have a plan and a strategy, a process for that step even. So for example, what's your process for prospecting? When we go on a meeting, I mean, I'm sure you've done this. Somebody says, Robin, I want to take you on this meeting. And you're like, oh, great. What are we expecting to get out of this? And they're like, oh, we're just going to get to know them. I'm like, no. No. Every single touch with the customer, we have to have a desired outcome. Do we always get it? No, but at least we can work towards that. Okay. So I have a process for prospecting, cold calling, elevator pitches, presenting my USP, setting the agenda in a meeting, building rapport. When you go into a meeting, you don't want to jump right into sales. You want to build rapport. How do you build rapport? Okay. And then, setting the agenda, running the meeting, getting to the end. And what do you want at the end of the meeting? Do you want them to agree to proposal? Do you want them to agree? What is the next step that you're going to try to get out of that? So that whole sales process, I think that you should have kind of some defined strategies and tactics that you use throughout that. And I'm not going to tell you to use Miller-Hyman or spin selling or any of the others. You have to figure out what works for you, but you better have one. And so that's my answer. The other answer, or the second part of that answer, is in parallel with all those tactics and strategies, something that runs in parallel with all of them at every single step is developing and building trust with the customer. Okay. And there are strategies and tactics for doing that as well. But you know that nobody's going to buy from you if they don't trust you. And trust takes time. So you have to figure out how you can accelerate that and strengthen that. That was a long answer. I hope that makes sense to you.
No, it did. And you know what? I missed mentioning your books. You've written 2 books. And I think if memory serves me correctly, you have the top performing salesperson, and you have the sales basic, right? Am I correct?
Yes, yeah. How to become a top performing salesperson and enjoy every step of the way, because if you enjoy something, you do it more and you get better at it. And sales basics. But thank you for that shout out there. I don't know how much more time we have, but I listened to a couple of your episodes, and
I love talking to you, man. I can keep that on as much as you
cool. Well, a couple of weeks ago, you had Benny Orr on, and it's funny because I've only met Benny a couple of times, and we've never really had a in-depth conversation. But like so many of the things that he said, I identify with. First off, he said, I think his greatest project or greatest success was his family and his children. And that's how I feel. As much as we want to talk about business, at the end of the day, for me, when I look at my 3 boys and, and my family, and I'm just like, this is amazing. And 2 of my sons have worked with me. Marcus worked with me when I was at Wordbee, and then he ended up at Amazon Web Services. And Makai worked with me, and he's working with an LSP called Ad Astra on the East Coast. And so that's enjoyable to help them get their start in sales. But the other things that Benny talked about was focus on your strengths. And I'm a big believer in know what you're good at and push that. Now, it's good to address your weaknesses, but go where you're strong. If you're really good at event marketing, don't try to do everything.
Be good at event marketing.
Just focus on events, man. If you're really good at SEO, SEM, then focus on that. Don't try to do everything. Being a generalist is a recipe for frustration and just kind of stagnation. He talked about being passionate. And I don't know if you can feel it from me. I feel it from you that, I love what I do, and I'm super passionate about it to the point where, I can get a little, when I want to go talk with salespeople, like I said, if you don't have a plan for this meeting, if you don't have a plan for your personal development, you're missing something here. And it shouldn't be me motivating you. It should be driven from within. The other thing he said was, bring something to the table. I think it's important. Like I always ask myself, how can I help these companies that I'm working with? What can I do? I don't just sit back and say, okay, I'm going to wait for them to tell me what to do. And I would encourage anybody out there to kind of think about that on a daily, weekly basis.
He said, produce value on a daily basis to the employer that you're working for.
That is awesome advice. And I totally agree. So it was good listening to him, because we haven't had like a serious face-to-face conversation. It's just,
I really enjoyed that conversation with him.
Yeah. And I don't know if I'm sure you remember where I can't claim to have done this, but he helped, he matched a couple or helped them get married, and then also later get divorced.
And he helped them with the divorce.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing stuff. Yeah. So I'm a believer in show up with a positive attitude, show up early. I still do to some degree, but would do a variety of sports. But I would go into the gym, for example, for karate, and I'd show up 20 minutes early and I would start practicing. You know what most people do? they show up early and they sit there and they talk, or they stand and talk. And then they wait for the instructor to say, okay, now it's time to start studying. I'm like, you just wasted 20 minutes. You know what I mean? It's like,
why are you doing that?
I think you should bring that kind of attitude to everything. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Robin?
Look, I mean, if it's, and I'll just give my personal experience on this one, because obviously I can't tell people what to do. I can just maybe use my personal experience as an indicator, I guess, similar to what we all do. When I was a system engineer working for the telephone company, I was good at it. I was, one of the best. And, I had my CEO complete accident. I didn't know who the guy is. It's like, I'm a young guy. I joined the company maybe a couple of years ago. There is no internet. There is nowhere you can go on the portal and see who the CEO is. I heard of his name, but I don't know what he looked like.
Right.
And he showed up one day. He set up my, he kneeled beside my cubicle. I'm on AutoCAD and I'm putting a network for a customer. And I'm all consumed with that. I see this old guy come in and, kneel beside my desk. He says, "You're Robin?" I said, "Yep." And he said, "What do you do here?" And I started telling the guy, I didn't know who he is. He said, after I told him a little bit, I paused. I said, "Sorry, who are you again?" He told me his name. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." different tactic now.
You've got the same name as our CEO.
Different tactic now. So
Yeah.
I switched and I started explaining to him. He said, "Well, guess what?" I said, "What?" He said, "Today I want you to be the salesperson who does the sales pitch for one of the largest customers we're doing a pitch for." I said,
Wow.
"Me?" I said, "I help the sales guy tell it right, tell him what to do and tell him what to say and build the systems for him." Like sort of a system engineer now, like an SA, right? But it's more on the tech side.
Yeah.
So I said, I don't know how to do this." He said, "You don't have much time. Basically, you got a couple of hours to study the slides." No, I said to him, I built the slides. I gave them to the sales manager. So yeah, I'll do them. So I agreed to do them. I think it was like $1 million back then per year kind of customer.
Wow.
So I go into this boardroom, and this boardroom is full of people. And he said to me, I said, "So what?" Before I go in, I whispered to him, I said, "What do you like me to do here?" He said, "Win the contract." That's it. I said, "Okay." I'm doing the presentation, Mark, and I'm telling them how the system work. Obviously, I'm speaking from an engineering perspective, so I'm very familiar exactly. I'm not putting any spins on it. I'm dry cut, telling exactly what this system is going to do. When are we going to deliver, by when? And then one of the guys, like, I haven't finished yet, like halfway through. So he said to me, "Who signs the contract for this? Like, do we talk to you or we talk to somebody else?" Now, before I went in, because he addressed me as a salesperson, I have printed a sample contract and I put it in my briefcase. So I just in my briefcase, I said, "Here's the contract, sir. Would you like, and the, so I
Like
said,
a
"That's
pen?"
it." That's it. The conversation was finished. Now, on my way out, my CEO told me, he became my executive mentor later on, etc. He told me at the time, he says, "From here on, you're a salesperson, and that's it."
That's awesome.
I said, "What happened to my tech job?" He said, "Well, get somebody else to do that. You're good at it." That's it.
That's a inspirational, motivational story, man. I love that.
And the reason later on, after we became friend, I said to him, and he's still like once in a while, like we talk. And I said to him, "So why did you do that?" He said, "You're, from from the company he managed and had like 12,000 people." He said, "Very few salespeople ask for the contract during a sales pitch
because they're afraid.
They're afraid of it." So he said, without hesitation, you reached out and gave the guy a contract, the customer, basically. He said, "That tells me something." And I think we found at the time I was like in my late 20s. He said, "I think we found a gem here." And he's right. I progressed very rapidly to become like the national director for sale for certain products for them. And it was awesome after that.
That's awesome. And I mean, there's so many ways, and people feel uncomfortable, but I think that if you have a tactic that you've worked out and you practiced it relieves some of that anxiety and it makes you comfortable. I had the same situation. I remember one of my first sales roles. I was selling advertising and exhibition space, and I didn't know how to close the deal, and I went with my sales manager, and he said, here's the layout. Which booth do you think that you guys would want? They'd be like, "Oh, we'd want this one." He goes, "Okay, well, we'll lock it in. Here's the contract." And I was like, That's it. It's that simple. It was. And so I just learned from that, and I think that's another important part of that team selling or working with other people, because you learn.
That's right.
Yeah.
The second thing is, like, for me, and I always tell my whoever I come in contact with is treat it as if it was your own.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's your own company, what would you do?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't put yourself, if I don't put myself in that shoes every single morning and think about it as I own it, what would my behavior be? What would I do next? What task would I do? And a lot of times it shows in my conversation with my customers. A lot of times customers think that for people who don't use translation all the time or don't know the company much as well, they probably would ask me, and I have had this question many times, if I own the company. And it comes across as I own the company when I'm doing my conversation with customers. And why I do that is because when you speak with passion about something, you automatically own it. It doesn't matter what subject it is.
Yeah. No, it's funny because I've actually had people ask me that too. They're like, "So are you the owner?" Like, I said, I wish, but I think the ownership, or excuse me, the owners or the leadership, they always appreciate people who go out there and treat it as their own. So it's some really, really good advice. Let me ask you this: what was the first thing that you ever sold, ever?
It's that contract that I told you about. It was it was a complete brand new network for a government contract. Okay, I sold that. And it wasn't
on your first deal, dude. That is pretty awesome. So
in localization, though, when I first took on the job of localization, and funny you mentioned, look up the you remember talking about the AmCham and you take the book with Florian and you go through it and you dial. Okay, so my first job started with Lexitech. Again, there's no cell phones, there's nothing. I was given those brown Nortel telephones in a desk and a yellow page book, the yellow page book. So I picked up the phone, started calling people. Now, I know from previous job, like when I was the national director for sale for the telephone company, the easiest way to do is start at the top. I started calling some of the C-level that I know. And I called one C-level CFO at an insurance company. I said, "Who's doing your localization work?" And I was having I don't know the guy, but I got to a point where 2 conversations down the road, he said to me, "Hey, I don't handle it myself, but there are somebody who handles this, and they're looking for somebody." I said, "Okay, so who are they?" So I called them. This is my first week on the job. Within 6 months, we were tracking about $800,000 billing per year.
Wow.
From that single transaction, right? So it's putting yourself out there, and don't be afraid. I mean, don't be afraid somebody says no. Taking no is it's not the end of the world. It just, dust it off and move on and go to the next call.
I always say, look, you already, people get anxiety or anxious because what are they going to do? What are they going to say? And what's going to happen? I said, I can tell you what's going to happen. They're either going to say no, or they're going to say yes, or they're going to say not right now. And so you don't have to worry about it, man. And all 3 of them are good. If they say no, get out of my face forever, then fine. Then now you're relieved. You don't have to worry about it anymore. If they say yes, awesome. And if they say not right now, to me, that's the future gold. Because the ones that say no, not right now, when you show them that you're regular and consistent on your follow-up, you're going to win their business, or they will introduce some other opportunity for you. So don't stress it.
Yeah, don't stress it. And, it's about activities, right? So you create activities, you close deals. And that's, if you don't have activities, you don't have deals, period.
100% agree. So, hey, Robin.
I'm really enjoying this conversation, but, we've exhausted the hour and a little over. I apologize about that. You probably have other meetings to run to.
Love talking with you. And I really enjoy the localization fireside chat. I mean, you're doing an amazing job. And I'm honored to have a chance to talk with you on your show.
Hey, I want to thank you so much for joining me today, Mark. And for those who are listeners and regular listeners on this channel, please look up Mark Schreiner at MemoQ RFP and give him a shout and get to know a little bit about MemoQ RFP. And he's willing and able, and he's got a team supporting him to educate, to support, to help find out a little bit more about what this software does and what this application does and how can it help you in your business. Mark, thanks again for being part of this conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Robin. You take care.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Localization Fireside Chat. Take the warmth of knowledge and renewed cultural passion with you. Keep exploring, stay curious, and until next time, this is Robin Ayub. Keep those global conversations alive.